Stonewall Jackson is on his way to Baltimore, via Leesburg, with 40,000 men. He intends crossing near Edwards Ferry. A farmer, from the neighborhood of Poolesville, who is known to be thoroughly loyal, came in this morning, and reported the following information. On Tuesday evening, about dusk, a regiment of rebel cavalry appeared on the Virginia shore of the upper Potomac, at a point nearly opposite Edwards Ferry, having with them a small mountain howitzer, from which they fired several shots across the river, without effecting any damage. It is believed the rebels have crossed in some force this side of Point of Rocks, and subsequently for the most part recrossed into Virginia, as though hesitating to make the experiment of getting a lodgment in Maryland. Accounts from the upper Potomac confirm the news of yesterday in regard to the presence of armed rebels in that region. A small propeller was fired upon from Ball's Bluff while coming down today. Great consternation was created among the passengers. The cannonading heard above here is said to have been at Edwards Ferry, where the rebels were endeavoring to drive our troops from the Maryland shore. Accounts show that 300 or 400 rebel cavalry endeavored to cross the Potomac into Maryland about noon on Friday, at Edwards Ferry, approaching from Leesburg. Our forces, consisting of 1 infantry and 1 cavalry regiment and a battery, opposed the passage, and repulsed them after a sharp contest. About 2 o'clock this morning the attempt was successfully renewed, the enemy crossing at several different points. The first raid was made on Poolesville, 4 miles north of Edwards Ferry, after which they visited Darnestown, where the government had established a branch of the military telegraph. They charged into the town, our pickets barely having time to give the alarm. Fortunately the operator had sufficient time to detach his recording instrument, cut the wire and escaped. Supposing that there was a Union force in the vicinity, the rebels remained only about half an hour and then retired, although at 12 o'clock today their pickets were still within hailing distance. We are informed also that the rebels crossed the Potomac in force yesterday night and morning, both above and below Point of Rocks. They crossed between ferries, fording the river. The previous demonstrations of campfires were a ruse to mislead our forces. They marched directly to White Oak Springs, 3 miles from Frederick. Their first act was to destroy a tunnel bridge across the Monocacy. A Union regiment which was stationed there has left the day previous. The latest accounts from the upper Potomac state that the rebel army of invasion, commanded by Jackson, entered Frederick about 8 o'clock this morning. Discipline was very strict, guards being posted at all the liquor shops, and private property being rigidly respected. The rebels have possession of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad at that point, and have torn up the track and destroyed the culverts in several places east of Frederick. They have also cut the telegraph wires. All the rolling stock at Frederick was saved, except 1 locomotive, which became disabled. The rebel pickets are extended 7 miles towards Hagerstown. They possess themselves of all the shoes, clothing, in the stores at Frederick, paying for them. The telegraph operator remains at Hagerstown, but says he cannot hold the office much longer. Nearly all the Union men have left. The latest information from the border, received at 6 this evening, says that the rebel pickets were then within 12 miles of Hanover, York County. Reports from Hagerstown this evening stated that the enemy was in force near there. No telegraphic communication with Hagerstown has been had since 9 o'clock. Expect to hear from the operator during the night. One of our scouts reached Hagerstown last night, having left Middletown, 18 miles southeast of that place, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He reports that the rebels were at Hagerstown in considerable force, and advancing. All the rolling stock of the railroad has been removed from Hagerstown, and the telegraph office there evacuated. A telegraph office has been opened at Green Castle, from which place our scouts and messengers will be sent. The telegraph operator has left Chambersburg because he anticipated that the rebels there would interfere with him. Another operator has taken his place, and reports all quiet, and no rebels in that vicinity. Everything is quiet here. A Union man who left within 6 miles of Frederick this afternoon reports no rebels this side of Frederick. Their pickets extended 4 miles this side. The latest advices from Western Maryland are to the effect that no further movements have been made by the invaders, with the exception of scouting parties in the direction of Hagerstown, and north of Frederick to the state line. The frightened telegraph operator at Hagerstown has been superseded by Mr. Wilson, of the city, who, we know, will not skedaddle at the mere rumor of the advance of the rebels. Up to this morning Hagerstown was quiet, and no sign of the rebel invaders. The rebels, it is presumed, have arrived at some point on the Northern Central Railroad, as the telegraph line has been tampered with, and the words "damned Yankee" heard by the operator here. It is not thought that railroad communication has yet been interrupted. Information from Hagerstown is to the effect that the rebels have not yet entered that place. The mayor has arrived at Greencastle, and says that Jackson's advance guard at 6 o'clock this evening was said to be within 6 miles of Hagerstown. At 9 o'clock this morning 50 rebel cavalry entered Hagerstown. The telegraph operator withdrew and established his office at the state line, 5 miles north, on a rock, in the rain. The Franklin Railroad, running from Hagerstown to Chambersburg, was destroyed for some distance, and pickets sent out towards Chambersburg. A cavalry raid is expected at Chambersburg, and many citizens are preparing to leave. The telegraph operator at Ellisville reports hearing heavy cannonading in the distance all the morning. Information reached us tonight, through a clerk in one of the departments, that our forces entered Frederick this morning, without opposition. We had previous information of our having occupied New Market, only 7 miles distant. Trustworthy information has been received that Stonewall Jackson, with advance, is now in Hagerstown, preparing to move with his whole army upon Pennsylvania. Our scouts from Hanover, Gettysburg, and Tannertown arrived here at a late hour last night, and confirmed the evacuation of the camps at Frederick by the rebels. Governor Curtin has promptly advised President Lincoln and the generals in command at Washington of all information that has reached here through the numerous channels under his control. The telegraph operator at Chambersburg, Mr. Wilson, has rendered services almost invaluable in reporting to Governor Curtin the condition of affairs, often when almost surrounded by the enemy. Last evening at 7:30 o'clock, the rebels made a cavalry raid into Westminster, about 500 strong, with 2 pieces of artillery. As they charged through the village, they discharged their pistols on unarmed men in the streets. Mr. Webster, district attorney, seeing rebels coming, made for the railroad, and after proceeding about a mile, met a train from Baltimore, which on his information returned immediately. There was at Union Bridge a train of the Western Maryland Railroad, a locomotive and 2 cars, which should have arrived at Westminster at 8 o'clock this morning, and in this city at 8 o'clock. This train has probably been captured. We have positive information that railroad communication is interrupted and telegraph wires were cut between Harper's Ferry and Cumberland yesterday by the rebels. It was discovered that Generals Lee and Jackson had crossed the Potomac River near Martinsburg. The whole rebel force is retreating across the Potomac. Our information in regard to the crossing of the rebels over the Potomac River is from Cumberland and from a most reliable source. A dispatch from Frederick at noon today says that heavy firing in the direction of Harper's Ferry commenced early this morning and continued until 11 o'clock. It then ceased, and commenced again at noon. Heavy artillery is heard at Greencastle and Chambersburg this morning in the direction of Williamsport. The main body of the rebel army is at Boonesboro. Their pickets have been driven to the state line. State troops continue to arrive and leave for Chambersburg as fast as transportation can be forwarded. General Lee is said to be at Hagerstown. The Chambersburg telegraph operator says that he heard firing all the afternoon from the vicinity of Martinsburg. We have been telegraphing all day for Home Guards and Gray Reserves, and hope they will report in companies, as all others do. After that is done, they'll be formed into regiments to suit them, if possible, but in accordance with the United States regulations. Men are wanted in companies. Philadelphia should respond immediately. There is no time for delay. A dispatch has just been received from Harrisburg, stating that a battle is going on below Hagerstown, between Miles and Jackson's forces, and calling on all troops to rush to Harrisburg. Our citizens are making a prompt response. Hundreds of armed men are rushing through the streets to the Pennsylvania Railroad depot. Heavy cannonading was heard this morning at Hanover, Greencastle, and Chambersburg, proceeding apparently from an action between McClellan's army and the rebels. The excitement has increased by the reported cannonading heard at Chambersburg and Greencastle. Military operations are progressing finely. Regiments are constantly being forwarded. Troops are pouring in on foot and by rail from all directions. A gentleman who left Poolesville at 10 o'clock this morning says that heavy firing was heard there from daylight till the time he left, from the direction of Harper's Ferry. That the fight has been progressing in the vicinity of Harper's Ferry seems beyond question. Both on the Virginia and Maryland sides of the Potomac heavy firing has been heard all day, with but brief interruptions. The reports are audible 2 miles from the city. The news thus far, received through private sources, gives promise of beneficent results to the Union cause, and has accordingly elated the spirit of all loyal men. Information from rebel sources received at headquarters at 8 o'clock this evening state that the rebel pickets had retired from the state line into Maryland, and that our pickets had been extended southward. Headquarters of the Army of the Potomac. 3 miles beyond Middletown. September 14, 9:40 p.m. After a very severe engagement, the corps of General Hooker and General Reno have carried the height commanding the Hagerstown Road by storm. The troops behaved magnificently, they never fought better. It has been a glorious victory. George McClellan. Headquarters of the Army of the Potomac. September 15, 3 o'clock a.m. I am happy to inform you that General Franklin's success on the left was as complete as that on the center and right, and resulted in his getting possession of the Gap, after severe engagement in all parts of the line. The troops, old and new, behaved with the utmost steadiness and gallantry, carrying, with but little assistance from our own artillery, very strong positions, defended by artillery and infantry. George McClellan. Colonel Miles held his position at Harper's Ferry, but the rebels were planting guns on the Maryland height commanding the position of Miles. It is feared that Colonel Miles will have to surrender. 8 p.m. Dispatches received from Hagerstown say General McClellan came up with the rear of the rebel army at Sharpsburg, and that a battle is now in progress. Passengers from Monocacy report seeing prisoners from Harper's Ferry, who report the surrender of Harper's Ferry on Monday morning, after a most determined defense, and the death of Colonel Miles, who was killed by a shell, cutting off one of his legs. According to these reports, Colonel Miles evacuated Maryland Heights Saturday evening after exploding one of his heavy guns, and throwing others on the rocks. The officers were allowed to go out with their sidearms and horses, and the men with their personal effects, which indicated that the surrender was conditional. The receipt of intelligence confirming the loss of Harper's Ferry, and the absence of dispatches from General McClellan throughout the early part of the day, cast a deep gloom upon the community, which was relieved only at a late hour tonight by the news of the hasty evacuation of Harper's Ferry by the rebels. This is considered to be sufficient evidence that General McClellan is progressing successfully. 8:40 p.m. A battle is reported as going on all this afternoon. The result is not yet known. 10 p.m. A dispatch, just received at headquarters, says Jackson has recrossed the Potomac, and General McClellan has engaged him with tremendous force this side of Sharpsburg and 10 miles from that place. The whole rebel army in Maryland will be annihilated or captured this night. It is credited here that a battle commenced yesterday afternoon in the vicinity of Sharpsburg, continuing until 9 p.m. Our army rested for the night where the last of yesterday's fight left them, and expected to renew the engagement at daylight this morning. The battle fought yesterday between Sharpsburg and Middletown closed without a definite result. No firing has been heard from Hagerstown since 4 o'clock yesterday. At Hagerstown, this morning, heavy firing was constantly heard in the direction of Sharpsburg, but no definitive information from that quarter had been received. A Union scout, who left the battlefield at 11 o'clock this morning, has reached Hagerstown. He reports that the fighting has been perfectly terrific. A reliable person, just in, reports the battle as still progressing, the bloodiest encounter of the war, perhaps of any record. Our right wing is on Sharpsburg Pike, 2 miles this side of Sharpsburg, and our left this side of Antietam Creek, near Patterstown. The rebels are falling back to Harper's Ferry, much worried and dispirited. The wounded are arriving at Hagerstown. This has been an eventful day in Maryland, and at the latest advices, everything was favorable. 10 p.m. dispatches just received at headquarters from Hagerstown say, "We have achieved a glorious victory." The news received during last night indicates that the result of yesterday's fight was decidedly in our favor, but still another battle is necessary to determine who shall finally be the victor. It was expected that the battle would be again renewed this morning, but no firing has been heard, and it is supposed that burying of the dead is the order of the day. p.m. Information received here this morning direct from the battlefield, represented that the battle would be undoubtedly be resumed today, but up to this hour no firing had been heard at Hagerstown. Headquarters Army of Potomac, September 19, 8:30 a.m. But little occurred yesterday, except skirmishing. Last night the enemy abandoned his position, leaving his dead and wounded on the field. I do not yet know whether he is falling back on an interior position, or crossing the river. We may safely claim a victory. George McClellan. Headquarters Army of Potomac, September 19, 10:30 a.m. Pleasanton is driving the enemy across the river. Our victory was complete. The enemy is driven back into Virginia. Maryland and Pennsylvania are now safe. George McClellan.